A few weeks ago, I had lunch with a friend, and I knew what he wanted to talk about, and that's why we had the lunch. So when we sat down, and before he could even say anything, I told him, I said, let me tell you two things about Brent Bourgeois. Number one, Brent Bourgeois has never been popular. Number two, Brent Bourgeois is not a trendsetter, not a leader. And he just kind of looked at me in amazement, and I said, you know what? I said, and he never wanted to be. He wanted to be the kind of guy who would always work in the background. You know, the one that dumped the garbages and cleaned the tables and you know, did whatever needed to be done. Never wanted to be in charge of anything. That's who Brent Bourgeois really is. And I can tell you now, Brent Bourgeois has a distinct fear of microphones. But Deacon Brent Bourgeois does whatever the Lord sends him to do. See, God has changed my life because He called me out and said, I want you to do these things. And I surrendered to Him and allow Him to work miracles through me. Not that I claim that anything is for me or from me. Everything is from Him. You see, I can look back at my life and wonder why I did certain things in my life, because I was never qualified to do anything that I did. I'm not smart enough for this stuff. And most of y'all will agree with that. But you see, God took over when I surrendered to Him. And we can all kind of relate to that in some kind of way in our life, right? Some of us have decided when we started working that we were just going to be a good employee. I'm going to show up for work every day and I'm going to do the best job I can. I'm going to go home and enjoy my family and maybe watch a little TV. And every day is going to be like that. I'm going to try to be the best person I can. And years later you retire and you're the superintendent, the foreman, the boss, the office manager, whatever. Never imagining that's what you would end up being. But God gave us the talent, or pulled out of us the skill that we needed to grow in those areas. Because it was needed. Someone saw in us what we couldn't see ourselves. And today, as Catholic Christians, we have to know that Jesus Christ is calling the Peter out of each one of our Simon. I'm going to say that again. Jesus Christ is calling the Peter out of each one of our Simon, right? So who was Simon? Simon the fisherman, right? Simon had this company, and he was, you know, he had this boat, and he had friends, he had partners, and he fished every night, and he sold his fish, and he went home and slept and enjoyed his family, and his life was full, so he thought. His life was complete. He was doing everything that he imagined he could do. Until on that day when he met Jesus Christ. And his life changed forever. You see, because when he realized who Jesus Christ was, Jesus Christ called Peter out of Simon. He changed it. Not only did he change his name, but he changed his life. You see, and if we listen to the gospel, we listen to when Jesus told him to, look, he says, you know, cast the nets out into the deep. Do you hear the desperation in Simon's voice? Lord, we fished all night. I just want to go home and sleep. But everything changed from that moment. Because Peter became the fisher of men. Peter became the first pope, the head of the apostles, the vicar of Christ. He was no longer Simon the fisherman. He was Peter the apostle. Because Jesus Christ called that out of him. Jesus Christ saw in him what he didn't see himself. He was satisfied, so he thought. But he was called to so much more. And so are we. In the first reading, we hear about Isaiah, right? And one of the things to remember is that the ancient Jews believed that if you saw the face of God, that you would die instantly. Because we are so unworthy to be in God's presence. And that's probably true. But he was there, and he's standing in the threshold of the house of God, right? Standing in the doorway and trembling in fear. Because he thought his life was over. And that angel flies down, comes down with that ember from off of the altar and presses that burning ember against his lips and purifies him. Gives him the strength to say when God calls out and says, "Who will I send?" Isaiah says those famous words, "Send me, Lord." He had the courage to be able to volunteer to do God's will, to be the voice of God to the people. But all three readings tell us, though, of the humility of all three characters. Because first they had to bow down and say, "Turn away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." You know, Peter did all of these great things in the church, but Peter was never perfect. Right? He forgot the food. He said the wrong thing. He didn't show up on time. He did all kind of things. But he always followed Jesus. And you see, but he shows his imperfections, just like each and every one of us are not perfect. And Peter followed Jesus. And I think the only doubt he ever had was when Jesus healed his mother-in-law. But he got over that. You see, Jesus is calling Peter out of the Simon in each one of us. Even with our imperfections, He is calling us to do His will, to make a difference in this world by surrendering to do His will, by us surrendering ourselves to Him. You see, because He came and died on the cross for us. He rose from the dead for us. He opened the gates of heaven for us. You see, we don't come to church to do Him a favor. We come to church to worship Him, who did all these things for us. You see, me being up here is not doing Jesus any favors. I am here because He called me to do this. And if He can do this much with me, just think when you give Him so much more to work with, what He can do with you. God is challenging each and every one of us to surrender to His will, to allow Him to change our lives so that we can make a difference in today's world. Because today's world needs something to make a difference. Jesus Christ is calling the Peter out of each one of us. Are we ready to let Him call him out? Are we ready to let Him change our lives? In a little while, we're going to come up for communion. And I want you to imagine when you come up, to picture whether you receive communion in the hand or on the lips. But I want you to think about that first reading. When Isaiah says that angel came to him and put that burning ember to his lips. When you receive that host, know that Jesus Christ wants to purify each and every one of us so that we can be worthy to do His will. And when God calls out, "Whom will I send?" what will we answer?